once again, thanks to the three speakers for some really interesting presentations that I'm confident will be really helpful to the committee as we move ahead with our deliberations and ultimately producing the report. I know there are a number of speakers on the line, but just as a reminder, the ultimate purpose of these webinars is to help inform the committee as we go about our work and prepare the final report. So the Q&A is restricted to committee members, and they're the ones that will be asking the questions. So why don't we start out with any of the committee members online who would like to begin, either with Ed Yu, Jacqueline Fletcher, or Amesh Adalja.
This is Liz Heitman.
This is Wayne Landis. I have a question.
Go, Wayne.
Okay, Wayne.
So the detection of the use of these materials or the prevention of it seems like it's going to be problematic because so many of the research laboratories can be dual used. Whether it's an agricultural research area in some faraway place, something in the United States, it just seems to me the detection of the potential use of these materials in warfare, I think that's going to be a huge challenge. And you guys didn't address it too much other than saying we should be ethical. But from my experience working at the Edgewood Area Admiralty Proving Ground, I know this can be enormously problematic. My example is if you can make an organophosphate pesticide, you can make a chemical warfare agent. And to distinguish between those two things is very difficult. And I'd like to hear some of your comments on that.
Ed, would you like to get it started?
Sure, happy to. I mean, that really gets to the crux of the FBI's outreach efforts, is that we stand on the premise that the scientific community is already incredibly ethical and responsible. The challenges that and the need for the education component is providing security awareness. That the whole dual use argument is not going to be list-based, but it absolutely is going to be looking at intent. And it's very difficult and challenging for the community as it stands now that are not already under some sort of regulatory regime to be aware of what some of the security implications are. And that's why I stated early on that now more than ever at the undergraduate or even high school level, where some of these tools are becoming more accessible, this aspect of not just citizenship, but looking at some of the security sensitivities, the history of how the life sciences have been exploited for offensive purposes, that type of education is necessary. And you nailed it on the head, and I stated before, our stance should be we need to anticipate to be surprised. That's just going to be the case. And having said that, we need to put measures in now to look at assessing how some of these different applications can be leveraged, in what ways, to go beyond the traditional warfare security context and broaden that scope. And then having done that, come up with measures to provide means for mitigating it. But you're absolutely right. The whole aspect of dual use, it really does boil down to looking at intent, and that's going to be incredibly difficult.
Dr. Fletcher or Dr. Adalja, would you like to comment?
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I totally agree with Ed said.
Okay. Joyce?
Yeah, can you hear me? Good. I was wondering whether any of the speakers that can comment on this. I get the impression that a lot of our efforts in dealing with this potential problem is to stop people from getting access to the data and information that we have in the West that they might be able to use to develop a terrorist threat. But I wonder if we're being a bit naive, because it strikes me that you know, this is going to become so widespread, and it may already be very widespread in other nations other than America and Europe. And we should rather be assuming that it's going to happen somewhere, sometime, and putting much more effort into, you know, as the last speaker just said, into mitigation effort, rather than into stopping the information from escaping from our control in the first place.
Well, this is Ed again. So just for clarification, I don't think any of the speakers mentioned about controlling access to information. I think the stance is that the inherent strength of life sciences is that it was born open in nature, and that's what helps drive innovation. What we're trying to do, and I can only speak for that, I'll let the other speakers weigh in, but it really is how do we equip and empower the scientific community that is already starting from the standpoint of being very ethical and responsible, but broadening that aperture of understanding of what the now security implications are potentially could be, because the impact is so broad-based now. And as I just from my standpoint, it is how do we also take it beyond just looking at the pathological aspects of looking at pathogens and toxins.
Yeah, I think what I'm meaning was that no matter how ethical and responsible we become in the West, that may not be the key aspect that's going to determine whether or not it happens.
I'd like to add to that, this is Jackie Fletcher, that I think the education and the culture of responsibility, those kinds of things that I was mentioning, are more to help developing scientists understand that terrorism or criminal intent could come within our own ranks. And, you know, this has been shown to happen. So it's one way of addressing the question. I agree with the questioner that it is not logical to think that we can stop others from getting the technology or the information, because they will, and they already have it in many cases. So it is a matter of finding other ways for detection, but also trying to prevent it within our own ranks.
And this is, again, I want to build upon that too, that one of the other aspects of conducting outreach and education early on is that, as I mentioned, it's looking at the front end, identifying potential risks, identifying possible suspect activity, not only within the ranks, but the fact is that there are external forces that might want to exploit and misuse these technologies. But one of the other things that I think I may have failed to mention in my presentation, that, again, through the course of our outreach education, one of the really nice consequences that some of the scientific community members have already identified some security implications and actually developed security solutions. And that is actually the best of both worlds, where you're still driving innovation, but now you're coming up with security solutions. And hopefully, through the broad engagement education, you're not only equipping the scientific community, you're driving better, more robust risk-benefit assessments, and then ultimately coming up with best practices, security solutions that ultimately will actually help drive policymaking as well too, because now you're going to get good data points from the real world to feed into the process.
Excellent, thank you. Other questions from committee members?
This is Liz Heitman. I have a question for Mr. Yu and Dr. Adalja. That Dr. Adalja, your email has you tracking zebras, and I'm wondering whether we should be thinking more about zebras or normal horses. Mr. Yu said that we should be prepared to be surprised. Do you think it is more important to be looking at the common diseases that we already know, not diseases, common threats that we already know exist in nature, that may be promoted in some way through gene drive work? Or should we be looking on the edges of what we already know? And obviously both, but in terms of where you consider the need for work to be.
Dalton, are you still online? I think he may have been disconnected.
He may have had to go off. So that's inside baseball for medical people, that when you hear hoofbeats, you don't think about zebras, you should think about normal horses. But if you're tracking
Dr.
zebras,
I'm here.
There you are. Hello.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I heard your question, and I think it's kind of a combination of both, and it's very hard to think about that because common things are common, and there is and that's if you have to if you're a betting person, it's going to be things that people have done before, like for example, rather than an enhanced pathogen. I think this is a larger discussion, not just with gene drives and entomological warfare, but for the whole field in general, because we know that people have been working on enhanced pathogens for quite a while. The Soviets had very extensive programs, but yet none of those things actually had been used. And I do think that there needs to be a way to think about both of them in the same way, and that may be to get away from a pathogen-centric approach and thinking about what does this pathogen do? Does it suppress the immune system? Does it cause septic shock? Does it cause that? And then I think you get away from thinking about whether something is old or new, but what does it do? And then think about an approach, kind of a preventative approach to counteract the actual mechanism of what this is doing to the person or the plant or the animal that's being infected. And it's kind of something that we're working on ourselves at the center, trying to come up with a new foundation to think about, a foundational way of thinking about this. But I think it's a good question, and it's one that's not easy to answer.
Ed, do you have comment on that? Because I know this is something you think about quite a bit.
Right. So this goes back to my prior comment that it does address both contexts, both of the regular horses and the zebra. That the challenge, though, right now is that what we're really talking about is providing context, and the application is completely contextual. And how do you look at security when it's that broad? And just to kind of give you an example, some of the things that I think about when and it's not specific to gene drives, but it's looking at what are some of the incentives from a law enforcement perspective, and you're looking at the baser human interests. It's what are the incentives, what are going to be some of the things that that might be applied, the applications to facilitate someone's profiting. And there have already been some articles that have come out looking at the hypothetical performance enhancement. And if you think about that, there's a lot of incentive in that aspect. And that goes, again, and Dr. Dalja mentioned that, this goes beyond just the pathogens. But now if you're looking at modification of whatever population you want for specific traits, that goes back to looking at are we in a position to do a holistic assessment on how these technologies can be leveraged. What are going to be the drivers to apply these? What traits are preferable? What are going to be the potential profit margins, either from a beneficial application or to drive a criminal enterprise? It's coming at it that angle, because as I mentioned, right now, currently, when it comes to life sciences, the security component is still primarily list-based.
Thank you.
Indeed, thanks. Other questions, comments from committee members?
So this is Wayne Landis again. One of the points that may have been missed is that in order to actually change the course of a battle or to change a society, you don't always have to have a huge direct cost. Oftentimes it's the threat that generates a lot of the same activity, whether it's an increase in defense, a loss of private liberties, and so forth. And I think sometimes it's the threat as much as the actual efficacy of this. And I'm just very curious as to what you think the outcomes would be from this, either if it's a reduction in plant productivity, the destruction of forests, or direct disease, or it's just simply in a large city saying that, oh, we have a couple of cases of the plague. It's, I think that response is something that may be just as important as something we haven't talked about very much. And of course, the way of countering that is through a large public education process. I was wondering if there are any thoughts about how to accommodate that kind of activity in the future, especially when it comes to gene drives.
So this is Ed Yu again. I can't agree with you more, and that's the whole goal of what the FBI has been trying to do with our outreach and engagement education on providing security awareness. The fact of the matter is that as I said, if we accept the fact that this is going to be soon to be broadly distributed capabilities, then it's all the more important that we try to get as diverse a population to understand what the potential implications are, what the possible consequences are, both looking at the beneficial and the potential negative aspects of it. But just as much as the development of the technology is multidisciplinary, the discussions that have to be ongoing with regards to the security component absolutely needs to be different sectors being involved in it as well. And in that, again, it goes back to once we have that type of holistic discussion and approach, you come up with a better assessment, come up with better identification of how the risks can be communicated, and then come up with measures to help mitigate them. It's one of the reasons why we are, the FBI has been engaging the amateur biology do-it-yourself bio community, sponsoring, undergraduate synthetic biology competitions, which are now leveraging CRISPR-Cas9 in their projects. The window of opportunity for engagement, it exists now, and we need to capitalize on it before that particular horse has left the barn. I mean, I think we're already at that point, but the education component is needed now more than ever.
Yeah, and Liz or Jim, might I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure, Wayne, go ahead.
So I actually sat here and I just went through the entomological terrorism, a tactic, and asymmetric warfare. And my specialty's risk assessment, and it talks about risk management and assessment. This paper doesn't have any kind of quantitative aspect to it. And I'm trying to get a feel for what's been done as it comes to looking at a report and so forth. I was wondering, has there been actual quantitative studies done on what the particular outcomes are and if that's available? Because, I'm looking through this and there's lots of words but no numbers. To me, it's probably not very real until there are numbers with it. So I guess I'm asking you guys, are you aware of efforts to put numbers to these assertions, and if those things are available?
This is Dr. Dalge. I have not seen any numbers put onto it. That paper is the only one that really comes up when you look. I don't know. Yeah. There may be colleagues in the Department of Homeland Security that do the risk assessment that might have gamed this out or thought about this, but I haven't seen anything myself.
Great. Thank you very much.
And I think the only numbers that I'm really aware of in the materials that I reviewed was numbers about efficiency of various attempts at using the technology, and that would just be part of the experimental process. But I don't think that's really what you're getting at.
Correct. But that's useful to know. Thank you.
Right, and this is Ed, and this goes back to my the project that the FBI did jointly with the National Academies is the fact that there is right now no effort to do not only what you're asking, to put numbers to that specific scenario, but just taking a step back and doing an overarching assessment on what the impacts are on something like gene drives or other similar types of applications. I do want to throw in again one more time that you know one of the key aspects of leveraging gene drive technology is going to be looking at access to large data sets. And Dr. Fletcher mentioned in some of those papers that the efficiencies were limited, but I would like to propose that part of it is also because the lack of access to those large genomic data sets that help with better RNA guide design. That's going to change if you look at who is acquiring those larger data sets at the genomic level. Genes or genetic sequences are not ascribed any kind of specific value at this point, but then if you take it to its logical progression, the more and more these technologies can be leveraged for commercial applications or whatever other, then all of a sudden it becomes these large data sets become a commodity. And if that is the case, then what does security look like in that space? Are we considering, if you're imparting value to these types of data sets now in the future, is there any possibility of addressing security in that environment?
Thank you.
Other questions from committee members? Let me ask maybe somewhere a combination of Dr. Fletcher and Dr. Adalja. So you talked about various cases in which pathogens, for example, in coffee, I believe it was Dr. Fletcher that you mentioned. Between the both of you, what do you think would be sort of the best examples out there in which this sort of biological material was used for well, inappropriate purposes? One of the things this committee is thinking about is case studies and examples. And so,
Jim, this is Liz. May I add to that question just a little bit?
Sure.
So our challenge is to come up, and this is part of the charge, with case studies that illustrate the wide scenarios, positive, negative, ambivalent scenarios in which gene drive technology may be used and may be useful. And we are looking at, in particular, and I said this at the outset, trying to identify plant species where good case studies would be possible. And you used kudzu, Dr. Fletcher, at one point. We have looked at the question of kudzu and what that may present, but we have not had many other examples that would be broad-based. So if talking about Jim's question, you can think about it in the larger context, that would be helpful.
Yeah. The example that I gave about the coffee rush was an example of nothing genetically engineered. It was simply somebody carrying branches from an area where there was infection to an area where there wasn't. So that really couldn't taken as an example. It was sort of a contextual thing that people have thought about targeting plants as a means of accomplishing something that we would say is a negative impact. In terms of what might be a good example to work with or to have as a case study, I don't know if kudzu would be the best choice, although there are some good sequences available for various bean species. I don't think, and kudzu is in the family of beans, but I don't think kudzu's been its sequence itself. You probably want to pick something that there was good genetic information already available for, that had a high rate of outcrossing, or that is certainly as dioecious and would have other traits amenable to this kind of investigation.
Dr. Dalja, any particular examples that come to mind?
The first part of the question, we're talking about, examples. I think, there hasn't been much that's actually been done intentionally. But if you just think about what happened with, for example, mad cow disease and what that did, it was an unintentional type of thing, and what that did to the cattle beef industry, I think it's really illustrative, because imagine if somebody even just had a scare that they put prion-contaminated feed into something, and now a whole swath of cattle were exposed and maybe incubating that. That would really be a major economic calamity. So I don't necessarily think we have to always think about somebody using them. I think we can use that as a historical example of what mad cow could do when what had happened when it wasn't intentional, and then try to extrapolate what would happen if somebody intentionally did it, because it wouldn't be very, very hard to do.
Okay, thank you.